Wayne, good morning.
Hello, how
I
are
know
you?
your job responsibilities take you around the world. San Francisco area is home. Hopefully you're enjoying the weather here. It is April. I know there are some days like this in the Bay Area, which has famously terrific weather. But again, welcome to Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Kevin.
I thought just to get the ball rolling here, and before we get into some specific questions about global consumer trends you're seeing, it'd be helpful just to give us a sense of the kind of spend data that Visa has access to as the world's leader in digital payments, and how you really analyze that information to develop actionable insights about consumer and business spend that run across your global payment network.
Well, Visa, about 25 cents out of every dollar that is spent in the United States and around the world is put on a Visa card. And we get a chance to see a lot of that data. It's anonymized, importantly, but we've used it to build some very interesting models in terms of a real-time view of what's happening with spending in all types of merchant segments in the United States, for example, competing with the Mart survey that comes out roughly around the 15th of the month. This is our retail spending monitor, and it gives us just a much more rapid view of what's happening in terms of spending. We've also used the data to understand the health of metro areas, the top 360 metropolitan statistical areas in the United States, and really understanding how they're growing and how fast they're growing. And this provides a lot of insights to our financial institutions as well as our merchant clients about where to have inventory, load factors on airplanes, and those types of things. And then finally, the last one that we've just completed is a really robust way of looking at cross-border arrivals. A lot of that data is really significantly lagged. World Travel Organization's data, almost 2 years old, and we can look at it on a real-time basis, understanding where people are going, the impacts of things like terrorist events, or what happens when the dollar changes. How does that impact travel on a real-time basis, and really following some of those trends.
Terrific. As you think about and as you look at trends in global consumption, how do they differ today from what you were seeing 10 years ago? And are there any surprises that you see in the data?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting if you think about what's been happening really over the last 20 years and the formation of households, et cetera. I mean, today, there's a 50-50 chance that someone in the world lives now in a large city or a city. I mean, that's 4 billion people that are living in cities now. And city living, globalization, creates a lot of synergies and a lot of efficiencies, allows people to go to school easier. Commerce is easier conducted. And it really has a big impact. But the other piece of this is not only do they live in cities, but we have more and more and a much more growing middle class. 1.2 billion people are living in cities and are in the middle class, people that have between $20,000 and $150,000 worth of income. And what we find as a result of that is that the spending habits of these individuals becomes much more predictable. Now, I know everyone here thinks that they spend differently than everyone else, but the data shows to be really quite different than that. Let me give you a couple examples. One of them is, if you think about the 20th century technologies that really defined the middle class, they were factors of convenience. The washing machine, the refrigerator, even the car. Now today, if you rent an Airbnb property anywhere in the world, you're almost assured that you're going to have those types of technologies, convenience-adding features in anywhere, whether it be in Beijing or Istanbul or here in Washington, D.C. We look at the data for car ownership between Washington, D.C. and these other convenience factors and say, a city in China. They don't always have cars in China, but they always have washing machines and refrigerators. So they've become very ubiquitous. Fast forward a little bit now, what we're seeing in the data, 21st century, obviously the ubiquity of phones and the connectivity as well as computers that more and more middle-class people around the world are having. And that creates a very different playing field as we move forward.
Just keeping on that theme, at home, my sixth grade daughter likes to remind me that she's the same age as the iPhone. And as it translates into e-commerce and now mobile commerce spending, what impact has that technology and the connectivity that you referenced had on how people buy, when they buy, perhaps even what they buy?
Well, again, I think the connectivity that we're seeing is really causing the gap between cities and rural areas to become much closer. The digital payment aspect of the fact that you can use this phone or a contactless card really helps in that convenience factor and enabling commerce really around the world. And we're seeing it in every location. So it's not something that's isolated. Even in some of the areas that are more in the emerging countries, let's say in Africa, for example, continual lift in the ownership of phones to conduct commerce, and it certainly allows them not to have to carry cash and all the challenges that they had with that previously.
Sure. Sure. Given the theme of the conference and the focus here today on global, let's turn to travel and tourism, and that's certainly an area and a segment that our membership and our industry in the hospitality and lodging industry knows a little bit about and cares a lot about. I'd be curious to understand the trends that you're seeing in global travel and whether they align with some of the analysis that we have and that we hear from our member companies. Specifically, where are people traveling, and how does the U.S. stack up as a destination in comparison to other countries around the world?
Well, what I find in the data again is what's most interesting is, first off, a tremendous advancement in the amount of cross-border travel. I mean, last year there was something like 1.3 billion cross-border arrivals. I mean, that's a lot of traveling across borders. And it's becoming much more ubiquitous. This growth of the middle class, for example, is really helping and enable that. And we see the concentration of that. If I look worldwide using our data, the top 800, there's 800 cities around the world that amount to about half of the travel. Even the top 25 cities are representing over a third of the overall cross-border travel. And they could be the standard categories that you'd expect, like London and Paris and Barcelona, but they're also showing up in more exotic places like Istanbul and Bangkok and even Bali. So there has been some changes there. But you couple that with the fact that we're seeing a lot of aging demographics going on right now. And Kevin, we see the changes in terms of, let's say, even ski destinations. We put out a piece recently on travel spending and what's happening in that space. And just having finished pretty much the ski season around the world, in Europe, a fabulous place to go skiing. But Europe has some challenges in the demographics of that country. I hate to admit it, but as you get older, it's a lot harder to ski. And as a result, with the aging of the population in Europe, you find that people aren't able to ski as much. And so now these countries have to start attracting more people from outside of their countries, younger. And often these emerging countries are seeing much more of that flow of people. So there's changes in some of the advertising that's really required as a result of that. Japan has had some good success of that. If we looked at our data for people traveling cross-border into areas of Japan that were close to ski destinations, a couple of years ago, that was like 14% of all of the arrivals in Japan. Today, it's 17%. So starting that process. And in the United States, similar types of data. Not very many people come to the United States to ski. And now, as the population continues to age, we're going to have to see some changes and some shifts there. What are you seeing in your data, for example?
Yeah, the industry in the lodging segment looks at a number of metrics to really evaluate and measure the health of the industry. That certainly plays itself in looking at development pipelines, but some of the specific metrics around average daily rate, the occupancy levels, all of those metrics continue to look quite favorable in the current environment. And so the industry continues to be optimistic about the current conditions. As it relates to international arrivals, while many of our member companies' brands are global in nature, certainly the U.S. market is critical, and international visitors are very attractive from a financial standpoint. They tend to have longer stays in terms of number of nights. Their average spend tends to be higher. So it's an important segment, and certainly the competitiveness of the U.S. relative relative to other markets and countries around the world is certainly a data set that we look at quite closely, and certainly the data that Visa has is valuable in that segment. Just finally, in terms of trends that you're seeing in global consumption impacting global travel and tourism, where do you see people buying when they travel? Is it retail? Is it other segments? Can you give us kind of a point of view there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the three key factors that are defining travel, cross-border travel specifically, but travel in general, around the world are really three items. One is, again, this massively growing middle class that, people really take for granted the number of people that we're talking about. When they hit $20,000 in annual income, which sounds low in the United States, we're looking at this on a purchase power parity basis, they become part of the global traveling class. So that is a big factor that we're going to see over the next decade. The second one really is the aging demographics. The fastest growing age cohort around the world over the next 10 years will be those people that are 65 plus. So this starts to change things in terms of why people travel, and one of them, relative to consumption, is medical tourism. People are starting to travel to locations to have medical procedures done, often cheaper than where they currently live, and then enjoying a vacation on the side. And then the final aspect really is the third key driver of global travel in the future will really be this connectivity aspect. And when I say connectivity, I really mean it in two capacities. One is the connectivity, obviously, that's brought about as a result of digital products, phones, et cetera. You can now go to Paris and read what the menu actually says if you don't read French with a translate feature. But also the physical connectivity. I mean, we're building so many airports, each bigger than the largest airport that exists around the world. And that connectivity is enabling much more cross-border travel, along with these other factors. So we're seeing that explosion happening over the next decade. And one final point, our estimates show that travel in general and the types of spending that people do in travel will actually exceed GDP over the next 10 years. So it's a really growing area globally.
Terrific. Well, Wayne, thank you. And certainly on behalf of our industry, we appreciate Visa's leadership as an enabler of commerce, generating safe and secure transactions, and also creating valuable insights for our businesses and our member companies to help inform their decisions. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you all for the opportunity here.
Thank you.